Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Safe House, brought to you by the SafeHouse Initiative. I'm Jeff Edwards, co-chair of the SafeHouse Initiative, and your host for today's podcast. Roger Grimes is a luminary in the world of computer and cybersecurity, with thousands of presentations, over 1,300 articles, and 14 books to his credit on the subject. Roger's voice is the one you really need to listen to. This episode, we're going to get acquainted with Roger, his background, accomplishments, and why his passionate pursuit to secure the internet. Roger, welcome to the Safe House.
I'm so glad to be here.
So take us on this journey, my friend.
Yeah, so I'm Roger Grimes, and just like you just said, I've been doing this for 35 years, written 14 books, 1,400 magazine articles, but really the reason why I wake up every day and what I'm trying to do is make the internet a safer place, a far safer place to compute. And literally, I wake up every day, every weekend. Even when I married my wife, she's a wonderful woman. I actually spent on our honeymoon, I was in the hotel writing a book and trying to teach people how to save the internet. And I think I really have good ideas. And she didn't get mad at me, and I knew I'd married the right woman. But it came about. I got into computer security, 1987. I read some books. Clifford Stoll's book on honeypots. I remember, got me into it. And then I read some other early books that talking about trying to track hackers and stop computer Trojans and worms and things like that. So I was really getting into the idea of, well, we need to stop hackers and malware. And this is, many years before the internet came into being. And I was an accountant, and I was a CPA at the time, and I was a horrible accountant. But even while I was being an accountant, I was really interested in computers and fighting hackers and malware. So, by 1989, for sure, I was disassembling computer viruses for John McAfee. R.I.P. John McAfee. So I was fighting bad things early on in my career. I had met him on something called the FidoNet, which was an early precursor of the internet. So fighting DOS viruses, that really was what I was spending. I would go to work, doing my 8-hour job and traveling to and from being an accountant. And then I would stay up through the night. I mean, oftentimes till 3 and 4 a.m., maybe getting a couple hours sleep, maybe. And I did this for years. I mean, I remember my wife telling me, you have to come to sleep with me. Like, I have to feel like you're my husband and you're in the bed. So I would go to sleep with her. She'd fall asleep and I'd get up and I'd go work on the computer. And I did this for a lot of years until finally one day, she's a smart woman. She said, why don't you do it full time as a job? And I can't do it. I'm an accountant. I've got my CPA. I've got an accounting degree. But then all of a sudden I realized she made sense. I went in, I quit my job, and I just kind of lucked into a computer job. But my career, I've done everything. After I was a CPA, I was a PC repair technician. I became a network person. Then I became a network manager. And then I progressed to eventually becoming VP of IT for a regional hospital group. I did that for a while, and then I became a VP for a hotel group. And then I would do teaching and presenting all along in the way. I ended up being in the March 1992 issue of Newsweek magazine, fighting the Michelangelo virus. That's one of the first computer viruses that actually did real damage. Before then, and most of the people that we were fighting were typically teenage kids from like 12 to 22, mostly men, boys, and they would write viruses and do things, but they were mostly just trying to be funny. Most of them didn't do bad things, but Michelangelo virus in 1992 was an offset because it would ruin your not your boot sector, but the fat allocation table or something like that, and essentially erase your hard drive. So that was like kind of the start of bad things. Although I kind of, wish for the years back then. And I started doing it full time, kept at it, fighting it. And no matter what role, even when I was a VP of IT, I would spend the majority of my time fighting malware and hackers in some capacity. I mean, I was always, even when they're giving me budgets and I'm having to do, VP things, meeting with board of directors and things like that, I'm still really blowing it all off, always doing computer security. I don't know how I didn't get fired. I wasn't probably the aggressive, VP and boss for these people because I had my own agendas. But eventually one day I woke up and said, oh, I really need to do computer security full time. And that was probably about 20 years ago. started doing that. Worked for Foundstone for a while. So Foundstone's still around. They got picked up by McAfee, but it was a great. I got to teach Ultimate Hacking Expert, and I created a couple of hacking courses and got to be around a lot of great hackers. I realized I love penetration testing and hacking, but I realized on a scale from 1 to 10, maybe I'm a 5, maybe a 6. I'm average, and I met a lot of people very talented. But I found out for defending against hackers and malware, like I really started to feel like I was the guy you wanted to have in the room. Like I didn't find anybody. There was a lot of people that were trying to be the best hackers, but I didn't run into a lot of people that were becoming the best defenders. And that became kind of my niche. And I eventually left Foundstone a little while after it was acquired by McAfee, which is funny, right? I started doing computer security with McAfee, eventually ended up at McAfee Associates. I think they were called Network Associates by then or something like that. But but I went to work for Microsoft for 11 years. I was a principal security architect, did really, really well there. The role that I was on what's called the Microsoft ACE team that worked right for the CISO, Brett Arsenal. And it was a fantastic experience. And what we did is we helped secure Microsoft internally, helped secure software. I did a lot of PKI stuff for internal Microsoft and external stuff that people might interface with digital certificates. So I became kind of a PKI expert for a long time. But we'd also go out and consult for customers that were either compromised and trying to recover from compromised or didn't want to be compromised. And that took me all over the world for 10 years. I just loved it. And the amazing thing is that I was doing really well. I got promoted within Microsoft. Most of my customers loved me. I would oftentimes be hired to put in, advanced detection systems, advanced firewalls, advanced authentication systems, the early multi-factor authentication solutions, and oftentimes to accolades. One of the things I tried to do was be on time and on budget, and I could do that consistently, and that really made me. A lot of people would request me, and I was so excited. I was getting awards, I got bonuses, I got promoted. I became the first in-field security technician promoted to what's called a level 65, which is kind of the first level of senior management. So I'm really feeling kind of heady that I'm this really great consultant, computer security consultant, really helping people. And then I started to notice that every single client I had was continually still hacked, no matter how much money they spent, no matter how much money that they spent on putting in the things we were telling them to put in there, that they would still be compromised, and almost always by social engineering or unpatched software. Usually it was social engineering, but unpatched software was certainly an issue. And all of a sudden it hit me that I was putting in all these advanced systems and I really wasn't helping my customers. They're still all being hacked, every single one. And I remember for the last year or two that I was at Microsoft, I was literally depressed. I would be, like this guy, if you can just see this sullen guy sitting at home, being depressed. And it got worse because for a long time, like in the mid to late 90s, a lot of it was because of unpatched Java. And I would go to a client, they'd be compromised by, some Chinese or Russian advanced persistent threat. They'd lose files, information, computers would be wiped out or whatever. And I go, oh, you have unpatched Java. That's how they broke in. We'd find the root cause of the hacking. You have unpatched Java, and we did a scan, and you have hundreds of thousands of unpatched Java instances in your environment. So I'd write in the report, I found these other 20 or 60 things. Everybody would have dozens of things wrong, right? They wouldn't have credentials right. They'd have inactive members in the user accounts. Just all kinds of problems, overly permissive permissions. But I could always count on that they would have unpatched Java, and I would put that as the number one. Like, you need to, the reason why you got broken into was Java. You need to fix Java. And I started to write that over and over and over, and report after report after report. And when I would come back into these companies 6 months later, a year later, oftentimes because they've been compromised again, but sometimes just coming back for an annual review or something like that, I would find unpatched Java. I would find them compromised over and over again. Like, this one company had been fined $100 million by the U.S. government. The CISO had to quit, and they got a new one in there, and they'd been compromised 3 or 4 times, and they still hadn't patched Java. And
why?
Yeah, nobody was doing. I even remember this one company, it was a healthcare company, healthcare insurance company that my own records were at. Had my own healthcare record, and they'd been compromised, and my data had been compromised. I had to be sent one of those letters. They had all this unpatched Java. I think they had like 1 million instances of unpatched Java. And so when I came back for this 3-month review, they showed me the patch management report that they gave to senior management and the board of directors, and it didn't have Java on it. I was like, "Oh, you fixed it?" Like I started doing. No one ever fixes it. Like no one has ever done it. And they went, "Oh no, 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 no. It's still not patched. But it's just that it was so big, the number that was unpatched, it skewed the report, the graph." And so we took it off of there. But everybody knows that Java is really the biggest problem, unpatched Java.
Oh,
And I was like, "Oh my God, you took it off the reports that management's getting? They're not thinking about it. It's just disappeared." And I remember I even got like, I started to get angry because nobody was fixing it. Like I would be in these rooms with the IT people and the CEO and stuff. And I'd say, "You need to fix Java. You need to fix it. Here's the 5 ways that you can try to mitigate the risk and blah, 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 if you can't patch it." And they would agree and they'd shake their head. And then 3 months, 6 months, a year would go by and they wouldn't do it. So I started to get, originally, I remember I just made the font bigger on the report. I thought, make it bright red and yell about it a lot,
Yeah.
But eventually they still weren't doing it. I'm like, why aren't they doing it? And I started to go, I think I want to go to your board of directors and tell them that I've identified what's your primary problem. And that if you fix this, it would make you significantly less likely to be attacked in the future.
Yeah.
And y'all aren't doing anything to fix it. I think they would tell you that you have to go fix. I was starting to get into this confrontational, threatening mode. But I finally asked myself, like you asked me, why are they not doing it? So I actually sat down and started to interview the IT employees and the CEOs and CISOs and stuff like that. And I was amazed by how many people in their company. I would go to the IT security team, and it'd be these larger enterprises Microsoft dealt with, and I'd say, "Hey, how do you think y'all are most likely to be compromised?" And again, these are companies that had been almost always compromised because of social engineering or unpatched software. By the time I got to that point, Java eventually got mitigated through browser mitigation, and it became less of a problem. And when Java stopped being attacked as much as it did, social engineering picked up, and it's never looked back. But then it became social engineering became the number one problem to this day. And let me say, over the entirety of my entire career, unpatched software and social engineering have been the number one and number two ways. But it used to be unpatched software for a long time, till about the time the Java problem got resolved, which was probably 2010 or something like that. And then social engineering took over as the primary cause, and that's never gone down since. Today, social engineering is involved in 70 to 90% of successful data breaches. I would interview the IT security teams, and I'd say, "What do you think is the number one root cause of why you get compromised?" And I would most of the time not hear the right answer. But sometimes there would be somebody in the room that would go, one guy, they would say, "Oh, I think it's social engineering." And I was like, "Okay, do you have data to back that up?" No.
Yeah.
So, and let me say, in no case did the teams ever give me that answer. They never, it was always, everybody guessing, and I would get about 20%, 20%, 20%. People say things like computer virus, which were things that really have died off, and haven't really occurred. So I was like, if the IT security people don't know what the problem is and don't know how to row the canoe in the right direction to fight the biggest problem, how is the IT organization going to know to do it? And how is the entire organization? If social engineering is the number one problem, how can you begin to say, I'm addressing this in my staffing, education, and getting people not to be socially engineered if the IT security people don't? And in my career, I never had an IT security team tell me, everybody, "Oh, it's social engineering." That's your dream is you go, what is the number one way that y'all are most likely to be breached? And you just hear everybody in unison go, social engineering, or even unpatched software, which is a distant number two. Today, unpatched software and firmware is involved in about a third of attacks. And it has been consistently for over 3 decades, about 20 to 40%. But according to Mandiant last year, it was 33%. So
Yeah.
And I would say,
Still a big number, but yeah.
yeah, and if anything has changed in that arena is it just went from unpatched software to unpatched software and firmware. So and what's firmware? It's just harder to patch software. That's about it. But so I did again. I was like, why do these people not know? Like, and I would sit there and I go, listen, social engineering is the biggest, and everybody would like shake their heads.
Yeah.
And again, I'd come back in 6 months or a year and go, okay, what new anti-social engineering initiatives have you taken up? And it would be nothing. Over and over and over and over again. So I was just like, oh my God, this is repeating. It used to be unpatched Java or unpatched software, and now it's social engineering. And everybody kind of agrees that it's the problem, and I'm putting it in my reports, but these people are not doing anything about it. Like, why would people, knowing the facts, not respond in the appropriate way? And so I just started asking. I interviewed hundreds of CEOs, CISOs, hundreds and hundreds of IT people. I'd ask them that question. If social engineering's the biggest problem or one of the biggest problems, how come you're not doing it? And they would start to tell me. Yep. It was resource allocation, it was compliance issues. And what I really came to see is that it was like everybody seeing computer problems like bubbles in a glass of champagne, where I'm being told, I got to worry about insider attack. I got to be worried about, work from home type stuff. I got to be worried about cryptography issues. I got to be worried about this and that and this and that. So all of us are hit and besieged by these bubbles. And what we've not been told is that two of the bubbles make up almost the entire glass. So unpatched software and social engineering account for 90 to 99% of the problem. And then you get these compliance lists from Sarbanes-Oxley and PCI DSS and the NIST cybersecurity framework, and they have at least 200 controls. And you know what they don't tell you? That two of these controls are almost the entire ball of wax. Like whether or not you will be successfully compromised individually or at your company is dependent upon how well you patch stuff and how well you avoid social engineering. And then I remember when I took a look at the first PCI list, it was like 20 page, I forget the number, it was somewhere 12, 20 pages for the first control, which is firewalls, dedicated to firewalls, which firewalls almost don't even stop any of the attacks today. Right. They're either so successful or whatever, but these social engineering attacks, socially engineer the human, they're past the firewall. Yet that was like 12 or 20 pages. It was like 33 controls. I would go to the section on social engineering. At first in PCI DSS, it wasn't even there. And then they added it, and it was like 3 sentences, And I was like, okay, if I'm in charge of an IT security team and I've got 30 controls, for firewalls, and I've got 2 or 3 for social engineering, which ones am I going to spend more time on, right? So it's like I don't know. I even likened it to, someone's breaking into your house all the time. They're breaking into your house, and what they're doing is coming through the windows all the time. Like you notice, most of the time when they're coming through, they're breaking through, and they can come through the doors, the windows, the floors, the wall, the ceiling, all this other stuff. But you notice over time, they're breaking through the windows most of the time. Yeah. And so for you to fix it, you're like, well, I think I need a better door. Yeah. Or I need to put more locks on the door. Yep. Right? Crazy. But that's the way we have somehow responded in cybersecurity. Huh. And then you would say, well, let's have a neighbor. You find out that your neighbors are all being broken into. So you're going to have a homeowners association and have the local law enforcement come on in. And he's like, yep, I want to tell you, we see a raft of break-ins. It's happening through the windows. The thieves are coming through the windows. So what we're going to recommend is that y'all get steel doors with a bolt lock. And we've also read that, and the feds are producing information, FBI is producing information, all telling you to concentrate. And let me say, and until just recently, and I hope I had something to do with it, because I certainly think I was the loudest person complaining. You would get FBI and CISA reports. As a matter of fact, there's a new ransomware report I haven't checked today, but you'd get these ransomware reports like, oh my God, ransomware, black cats taking over the world, yada, yada, yada. And it would say how they break in. And 90% of the time it was social engineering. I was like, and it was always social engineering as part of the cause. But for most of the ransomware attacks, it was social engineering only as the way they were getting in. And then they'd say, this is how you stop the attacks. and it would not list anything that stopped social engineering. They go, make sure you patch, make sure you're using multi-factor authentication. And I'm like, I'm literally, God bless her heart, Jen Easterly, Director Jen Easterly of CISA, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, tolerates me because we've had conversations about this, and I'm constantly going, look, Jen, here's another report that doesn't even mention social engineering. And they, for a while, they even said the top 3 things you can do. And one of them, the third one, was to fight social engineering. But it used to be, I was like, you've got 18 things listed here, and none of them address the primary cause. So, I mean, it wasn't just us saying it wrong. It wasn't just our compliance list and guidance. It was our cybersecurity police, the FBI, and CISA. And to this day, that is still true. That I see very few reports that actually tell you to mitigate the number one way that you're successfully attacked most of the time. They're getting better. I'm starting to see some of the reports there are, and they'll be in the top 3 things, but I'm amazed by how many security reports. Again, I haven't checked today's ransomware report from CISA, but I'd give it a 80% chance it's not going to mention social engineering as the primary thing you should do, even if it's the primary way they're getting in. And let me say, some ransomware gets in through unpatched software or something like that. And then a lot of times they'll get through from stolen or learned credentials. But I'm like, okay, but how are those stolen or learned credentials taken? I know the answer. 79% of the time it's social engineering. You know? So like, I'm just amazed, like where they've gotten in through social engineering, and then they'll recommend multi-factor authentication or something like that. And I'm like, did you know that 80-90% of multi-factor authentication can be socially engineered around as easy as passwords? They just ask for the MFA code instead of the password code. You know, so you're recommending something that doesn't even work against the problem. You know, but if you see the word phishing resistant MFA, I can tell you where it came from. I've been writing about it for 4 or 5 years. I've been the loudest person. I've been yelling, screaming, and you're starting to see Microsoft say it. You're starting to see Google say it. CISA certainly saying it, but they'll still tell you get MFA. But if you have a chance, you know, go to this phishing resistant MFA. I'm like, you should not go to any MFA that is not phishing resistant. And Microsoft Authenticator, Google Authenticator, and Duo, I love them all. I love the vendors. They're not phishing resistant. And the whole reason you're going to MFA is the bad guys can steal your passwords.
Right.
So it doesn't make sense to, you know, do this. So what let me say, it all got into me. I'm like, why is this doing? I'm interviewing lots of people, and I just realized that we are not a very data-driven industry. Like, we're storing and trying to protect all the data, but in other industries, you have insurance companies and actuaries going, well, you know, if you're going to try to protect this, you know, you're going to need to have this and that. And we were not using our own data of how this is what so I came up with a philosophy. I think it was called risk aligned. When I wrote a white paper for Microsoft many years ago called risk aligned risk management. I eventually changed it to a data-driven computer defense. That became the title of my book around that. I think I first wrote it in 2019, 2018, something, the first edition. But I finally took, and like the first third of the book is, hey, computer security defenses, almost all of them are broken. This is why they're broken. This is how you can fix it, and here's examples of implementing a data-driven defense. But it's got one simple concept, which is you should focus more on the ways that you're most likely to be compromised. Like you have to determine, are you being broken in through by the windows or the doors? And then start to focus on the one that's most likely to be the way. And today it's social engineering. 70-90% of it's social engineering, 33% of it's unpatched software and firmware. Stolen credentials or guest credentials are kind of a smaller component, but they really are tied to the first two causes. But one day it's going to be something else. If I have some success in my life, the answer will not be social engineering and unpatched software one day in our career, right? Before we retire. So you really have to create this framework within your mind and framework within your organization that you're looking at data, that you're looking at to see how could me or my organization be most likely compromised in the near future, and then let me dedicate my resources and mitigations against the most likely causes. And it's funny to say that, for me to say, you should look at how you're most successfully attacked or most likely to be successfully attacked and concentrate on stopping those first is the most ridiculous thing I've ever had to say out straight, because it just is so obvious. But let me say, even today, almost no organization does it.
That's incredible. So your book, you wrote that as kind of a compilation of everything you've learned up to that point, up until 2019 or 2018, that range of time. So you wrote the book. Now, can you talk a little bit more about the book itself, how it's constructed and how you kind of convey it?
It's I've written 14 books. It's my only self-published book. I asked Wiley, who I publish most of my books with, hey, do you want to publish this book? They said no. Now that it's sold over 50,000 copies, they really wish. I'm glad they didn't, because my bank account's looking better. But, so I wrote it as a white paper from Microsoft. It was called a risk-aligned risk management approach for the first edition or two. And it was up on their website even for a lot of years after I left Microsoft. I think it's gone now. But I made it into a book while I was still at Microsoft. So that would have been probably 6-7 years ago, and I had my first book that I wrote. But again, it talks about, like, at first it just says the problem. This is what, the reason why we're being successfully attacked is we're not figuring out how the burglars are breaking into the house right. And we're being distracted. I even say, why don't we do it? Like, here's the craziness, that we're not focusing on the right things. And I have a whole chapter dedicated, this is why we're not focusing, because no one wants to be intentionally misdirected or misaligning. But the fundamental reason why we are being successfully hacked is that we're misaligning the appropriate defenses against the wrong things causing the problem. And it happens, like I tell people, like VPNs, firewalls, and VPNs, firewalls, and what else do I say? But in antivirus or something like that, they're really not that effective. And one of the clear cases is that if it was, we would not have the problem we have today. Or people say, what about endpoint detection response? They give $1 million reward if they miss something. Rod, you saying they're not 100% effective? I said, yes, I am. And they're like, well, how can you say that? I said, because if there was anything that was 100% effective and didn't kill operations, everybody would pay a premium for that product, and ransomware would be magically gone. It is clearly antivirus, like, we're 100%, 100%, 100%. And I'm always like, how can they say that? Because I get ransomware samples all the time, and I upload them to Google's Virus Total, and none of the antiviruses are ever detected. And I'll come back like in a month or two, and maybe 17 of the 74 engines detect it. And I'm like, and they're all saying 100%. But let me say again, none of them are 100%, because if we had one that was even close, we would all buy just that one, make that vendor the new trillionaire company, and we wouldn't have to worry about ransomware anymore. Like, the entire way we know they're all lying, all of them, is that we have ransomware. It wouldn't be a problem if they were actually 100% accurate. They're all liars. So yes, I'm sorry, I digress. But
no. Yeah, it's great, because your passion is, the thing it would. It's obviously makes an intelligent person like yourself insane, is that there's this much of a risk on two things, but we focus on 80 other things that don't really matter. And what you're trying to do with this book is say, hey, let's focus on the things that matter and put our resources behind it. So put the wood behind the arrow to get this thing killed.
Yep. I said, here's the problem. This is how it became the problem. And because none of us are trying to do the wrong things. Then I explained, this is what you should do. And there's a couple of core concepts. Number one is we should focus on the right things, which are these root causes and not the outcome of root causes. If you want to stop somebody from breaking in your house, you need to concentrate on how they're breaking in your house, not what they're taking once they're in your house. If you're trying to stop them, like ransomware. Ransomware is not your problem. It is the outcome of your real problem. And what I mean by that is that if I could snap my fingers, make ransomware go away, well, it's not going to stop your problem, because your real problem is social engineering, unpatched software, stolen credentials, or eavesdropping or something like that. the bad guys are going to use that to install bad things. Or, it
Yeah.
could be pass the hash attacks. It could be password stealing Trojans, could be wiperware. It could that they just exfiltrate your information. If you don't concentrate on stopping how the badness is getting in, you're never going to stop the badness. Even if we stop ransomware one day, we get the perfect antivirus or something. So you have to concentrate on the root causes. But I had other things again in the book about how to create a mental map and a framework and an operational framework of how to measure how you're most likely to be successfully attacked.
Yeah.
A lot of people have the data they need already, but they just didn't know it. And sometimes you may have to create some additional data, but then using that data to filter through the system to make sure everybody in the perfect world, I'd be able to walk up to any person in the company and go, hey, how are you most likely to be compromised by, hackers or whatever? And they go social engineering, right? They would just spit it out there and maybe patching, but they don't. So there's a lot of things in the book. It goes through the mental maps and the changes. And I have a couple of things that you need to do this, this, and this, and this. And then I just go through examples, of how people implemented those ideas. And let me tell you, once you start doing it, you actually apply it all over your life, right? You start looking because really cybersecurity is risk management. And all I'm talking about is a better way to allocate the risk appropriately. And that applies to even in our real life, people, and it's strange, even if you know the real stats, sometimes as humans we don't respond correctly. Like, your odds of dying in an airplane accident are like 1 in 10 million or something like that. It's really low. But every time I'm taking off in the airplane, I kind of shake a little bit, right? Even though I've been flying my whole life and I know this is one of the safest things you can do. The far more risky thing was driving to the airport.
Yeah.
But none of us are shaking and nervous while driving to the airport.
As we weave in and out of traffic, getting there in a hurry.
yeah, except for maybe my passenger. But what I mean is that even sometimes when the facts, you have to retrain yourself to think, I got to pay attention to the facts.
Yeah, and Roger, I think this for our SafeHouse audience, just to let them know that we've had a conversation about taking your book and having a really dig into the book itself and to take the lessons out of there and how to apply them to their environment. And so we're going to do a special edition. Actually, it's a special edition series of Roger Grimes and your book, the data-driven computer defense. And really get under the hood there and how to apply it in our environments. And so, Roger, thank you for taking us on this adventure. And any other thoughts you want to have before we get started on the series, which will take some time. I understand that, but any thoughts before we move on to our next subject?
No, just thanks for making a part. And what I will say is, you said, Roger, you're intelligent, and I appreciate all that. I say, I'm not sure how intelligent I am. I know that I'm not stupid, but probably the best thing I did is I just started to ask simple questions about why we do things and make simple observations. And when I started to take a step back from this industry and ask simple questions, a lot of the answers became really obvious. But it's funny. So a lot of the stuff I say, people in the book and what we're going to say in the coming podcast, when people hear them, they're like, of course. But sometimes it doesn't seem so readily apparent until you hear it for the first time.
I'll tell you what, Roger, I'm excited about what we're going to do together, but really great conversation. And thanks for sharing your career and your insights and your passion. Really do appreciate it.
Sure.
Join us for a special edition series of the Safe House as Roger unpacks a data-driven computer defense. Roger describes this particular book as his magnum opus, and if he could teach anything to the world, this would be contained in these covers. So please join us on this magnificent journey with Roger to learn about the data-driven computer defense. That's our podcast for today. I'm Jeff Edwards for the SafeHouse Initiative. Thanks for joining us, and remember, be safe, be resilient, and be kind to each other. For more information on the SafeHouse Initiative, please use your mobile device to scan the QR code on the screen. Send us an email at safehouseinitiative.org@gmail.com or visit us on our website, safehouseinitiative.org. We look forward to hearing from you.